Hello friends, I am Chevy. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's all great and fantastic. Everything here is pretty good. I've got 5 coats of finish on the desktop or the tabletop. 3 coats on the underside. I'm stopping at 3 coats. If you didn't watch yesterday's video, I am finishing this desktop with Minwax Wipe-On Poly. And I talked a little bit about that decision yesterday, but I know Jonathan said he doesn't have a whole lot of experiences with finishes, and he usually does painted projects. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about this finishing technique today because there's a few things you need to understand about oil-based finishes if you've never used an oil-based finish before. One of the reasons that I like using Wipe-On Poly is the application is pretty much foolproof. It's fairly similar to the way that I apply shellac. Now, when I buy a shellac, you can buy pre-mixed from a company called Bullseye or Zinsser. This is Bullseye shellac, or you can buy flakes and you can mix your own. The traditional method of using shellac, and this is a very traditional finish, going back, I don't know, thousands of years, going back a very long time, hundreds of years for sure. This finish has been used on guitars and instruments, pianos for a very long time. It's rubbed on. And the same way you would rub on Wipe-On Poly. It's a slow process of building up a sheen. And people call it a French polish method. Now, when I use shellac, I do a kind of a hybrid version. I paint on the first at least 1 coat, maybe 2 coats. And the thing about shellac is it dissolves into the previous layer. It works very similar to something like lacquer. Lacquer is the same way. This is a chemical bond that dissolves the previous layers, and you know, you really don't get layers with either of these 2 products. You get 1 layer because they each dissolve into each other. So I will flood coat my first coat or 2 with shellac, and then I will sand it out. And then I will start putting on top coats the same way I put on Wipe-On Poly, which is just to fold up a piece of t-shirt and you're wiping on very thin layers. So when I say this has 5 coats on it, this is, if you were to touch this or see this, this is really about the equivalent of 1-ish very light brushed coat of brushing polyurethane. It's a very thin finish. And the thing that I like about it is it's basically impossible to screw up if you do it that way, if you put on really thin coats, because this is really, you know, this can says Wipe-On Poly, and this is a polyurethane finish, but if you don't know what a polyurethane or specifically oil-based finish is, this is really an oil finish that happens to have some polyurethane. It happens to have some plastic in it for scratch resistance. It was made for floors. But it's really an oil-based finish. And we talked yesterday, all oil-based finishes, whether you're using something like boiled linseed oil, which I use a lot of, or even teak oil, which I use for outdoor projects, oil doesn't dry. It will never dry. It will only ever cure by oxidation, by oxidizing. It rusts, essentially, which breaks down the chains, the hydrocarbon chains in those oils, and turns them into this durable finish. And so the thing about using something like this, if you're going to use an oil-based finish, the thinner the better. Now, that means it's going to take days, right? Because you're going to have to put on coat after coat after coat after coat. But if you don't, if you try to like put this stuff on wet, and have it shiny and, you know, like a sheen of water on your surface, it's going to take forever, and it maybe not ever cure. It might not ever get fully cure because the top layer is going to crust over, which is sealing off the under layers from oxygen, and it needs the oxygen to cure. And so if you really go hard and heavy with an oil-based finish, it's going to be a disaster. So I wipe it, barely wipe it. I'm getting a damp cloth, and I put it on, and you can see a sheen, and that's it. I don't want to see I don't want to see drops or any sign that there is excess oil on the surface. It's just a simple wipe and that's it. You know, like as if you're, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. You just have to see it and do it. It's just as thin as you can possibly get it, basically. The goal is with a single swipe, going from end to end, I can get an even sheen, and if I look at it, you know, I keep this light on when I'm finishing, and sometimes I'll put a light down. I want to look across the grain, and I don't want to see any voids in the coat, but I also don't want to see glistening, you know, sections. I want it to be one even, just barely damp wipe. And if you do that, and you do that enough, you'll eventually get a nice buildup of the oil, and you wait 3, 4, 5 hours, depends on temperature and all that sort of stuff between coats, and what you'll end up with is a very durable, hard surface because you've given each of those individual layers a chance to set. Now, this product, specifically Minwax Wipe on Poly, they claim that 3 coats of this is equivalent to a single brushed on coat. I think that's probably not true. I think it's more like 3 coats of this is equivalent to a half of a brushed on coat, a very dry brushed on coat. I think that most people, when they think about putting on a product like brushing urethane, they kind of want to wet the surface, and that's too much. It really is too much. These products, specifically what I've shown you, boiled linseed oil, teak oil, these all say one-step finish. This says teak oil finish, and this says boiled linseed oil. Maybe this doesn't. These products are not. This is not teak oil. In fact, I've not looked at the MSDS on this, but I would be willing to bet there's probably less than 20% teak oil in this can. This is mostly some other version of oil, some sort of chemical hardeners, some evaporative compound like mineral spirits or something like that. There's not a whole lot of oil in here because if you've ever used teak oil, like real teak oil, just straight up teak oil, it can take a month to cure, depending on how thick you put it on. All of these products have some sort of chemical or metallic hardener in them that helps the oxidation process, that helps the oil cure. And so yesterday I did 3 coats of this, and that's about all I'm willing to do in a day because if you keep laying this stuff on, like I said earlier, those base layers are not getting a chance to cure before you go and put the next coat on. So I've got 5 on here right now. I think based on the sheen that I have, looking across it, based on the feeling that I had before this 5th coat, I want to put on a 6th coat for sure, but I'm going to wait about 4 days before I do that. I'm going to let it sit. I got the fan running, keeping this fully, bathed in oxygen. And then at the end of 4 days, I'm going to wipe this out with synthetic steel wool, which, by the way, I wiped it out after the 3rd coat. So the 4th and 5th coat, I wiped the first 3 coats, just wiped on, didn't touch it. After the 3rd coat, sat for 12 hours. I wiped it out with synthetic steel wool, and then put the 4th coat on, and now the 5th coat on. I've got a few little trapped hairs in here. They will come out when I buff. I'm going to buff this. After it's just sit for about 4 days, I will buff it, and then I will wipe on a 6th coat, and I think that's probably going to be it. At that time, I have a very even sheen right now. At that time, if I notice any spots and I determine I need to go to a 7th or 8th coat, I'll do that, but that's all going to be, super subjective. It's going to be dependent on the wood. This is pine. Pine is super, super absorbent, so it soaks up a lot of this. I could put probably 10 coats on this pine before it would look like, say, 5 coats on cherry or, something similarly dense, maple, because it really soaks it up. But I have a pretty even sheen after just 5 coats, so I think that, a simple scuff to get rid of some of the fuzzies and some of the nibs, wipe on a 6th coat, and I'll be good. And then I will likely wax on top of this. I almost always wax on top of everything. When it comes down to a natural finish, or a not natural finish, but a unpainted finish of any kind, I usually wax. The only exception is lacquer. And Jonathan said something about not having experience. Lacquer is the kind of the easy button, right? If you've never experienced using lacquer, this is the easy button. The thing that makes doing something like these teak oil or Danish oil or poly finished jobs, the thing that makes those difficult is time. It takes time. It takes a week. It takes 2 weeks. It could take a month if you're using a natural oil finish with no chemical hardeners in it for that finish to fully cure and fully set. It just takes a lot of time. Lacquer takes hours and it's done. Like, you know, put this stuff on and 4 hours later you can be using it. Put on a coat and within 10 minutes you can put on a second coat. Very similarly, whether you're using spray lacquer or brushing lacquer, Deft, it makes a very good brushing lacquer. You want to go thin. Thinner is always better. And the nice thing about lacquer is, you know, you can brush on a super thin coat, wait 15 minutes, brush on another super thin coat, wait 15 minutes, you know, and in a matter of a couple of hours, you know, of coats or you'll have a beautiful, beautiful finish. The thing I don't like about lacquer is it's kind of, it's more, it feels more like plastic than any other finishes. Even finishes that are literally plastic, like wipe-on polyurethane. Lacquer finishes feel very plastic to the touch. And they're just a build on top of the, you know, they don't accentuate the grain. So they're wonderful for quickness and for getting a project out the door. They're not great for touch and feel and really bringing the wood out. So I don't know. I've tried them all. And I keep coming back to shellac and wipe-on poly. These are the two that I use the most, unless I'm doing something like an outdoor project. Like I've made some collapsible chairs and stuff for around a campfire ring, that sort of thing. I will use teak oil for that. Really, really good product for that. Boiled linseed oil is wonderful for like crafty type small projects, things that aren't going to have stuff set on them because it will take a long time for that stuff to fully cure. And if you were to make a tabletop with linseed oil and set something on it within a couple of days, chances are it's going to stick. It's going to leave a mark and you're going to have to fix it. So there you go. A whole bunch of info about finishes you never knew you wanted or needed. If you have any questions or any anecdotes about your finishing process, I would love to hear about it. I think I might do a video on the other channel about how I use wipe-on poly versus how I use shellac, because I think they're very similar in a lot of regards, but they're also very different. So we'll see. We'll see if I pull that off. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends, wonderful people. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is intelligentsia. It is a noun meaning the class of people who are cultured, educated, intellectual, and interested in art and literature. You see those gray hairs? Well, making whoopee with the making whoopee with the intelligentsia was the way I earned them. Dorothy Parker, an American author and poet. Intelligentsia. INTELLIGNTSIA. Is that what my gray hairs are from? Because I definitely have not made whoopee with... Okay. A little bit too giddy. Maybe it's the fumes.